Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we journey to London in November 1935, where within the opulent dining room of Claridge's hotel, a prominent financier lies dead at his own dramatic farewell dinner. Stay with me until the very end, for this mystery reveals not just one murder, but a web of family secrets stretching back 7 years. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoy these stories and the work I do here, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now settle in with a hot cup of coffee, stay curious, and let's get started. The Last Supper at Claridge's. Chapter 1. An Invitation. Most curious. The November fog had settled over London with its customary persistence when I received Poirot's urgent telegram. The message was brief, but compelling. Return immediately. Most curious invitation requires consideration. Your presence essential. H.P. Having learned over the years to trust my friend's instincts in matters both trivial and grave, I abandoned my plans for a quiet evening at my club and made my way through the murky streets to his immaculate flat in Whitehaven Mansions. I found Hercule Poirot in his sitting room, positioned with characteristic precision in his favorite chair. Before him, on the polished mahogany table, lay what appeared to be an invitation, though even from the doorway I could see it was no ordinary social summons. The paper was of the finest quality, cream-colored with a watermark that caught the lamplight, and the script was executed in elegant copperplate that spoke of expense and careful consideration. "Ah, Monsieur Hastings," Poirot said without looking up, his green eyes fixed upon the document with the intensity of a jeweler examining a suspicious diamond. "You arrive at the precise moment. Regard, if you please, this most interesting communication." I approached and took the chair he indicated, noting as always how everything in Poirot's domain was arranged with mathematical exactitude. The invitation lay perfectly centered on the table, flanked by his silver letter opener and a small magnifying glass, both positioned at right angles to the paper's edge. "From Sir Reginald Ashworth," I observed, recognizing the name immediately. "Good Lord, Poirot, that's quite an honor. The man's practically a legend in financial circles. What does he want with you?" Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign I had learned to recognize as indicating either amusement or concern. In this case, I suspected the latter. "Read it, mon ami, and tell me what impression it makes upon your excellent practical mind." I lifted the invitation carefully, surprised by its weight. The paper was indeed of exceptional quality, and the words were laid out with theatrical formality. "Sir Reginald Ashworth requests the honor of the company of Monsieur Hercule Poirot as guest of honor, at an intimate dinner to be held in the private dining room at Claridge's Hotel on the evening of November 15th at 8 o'clock precisely. This gathering shall serve as my last supper, and your presence would complete the circle most satisfactorily. The evening promises to be memorable. RSVP. At your earliest convenience. I read the invitation twice, then looked up to find Poirot studying my expression with keen interest. "Rather theatrical language for a dinner party," I ventured. "This business about a last supper? Do you suppose he means it literally? The man's not ill, is he?" "Précisément the question that occupies the little gray cells," Poirot murmured, tapping his temple with one perfectly manicured finger. "Sir Reginald Ashworth is known for many things: his financial acumen, his political connections, his somewhat dramatic temperament. But he is not known for frivolous gestures or meaningless words." I studied the invitation again, noting details I had missed on first reading. The paper bore an embossed crest, and the ink appeared to be of the sort used only in the finest establishments. More puzzling still was the peculiar phrasing throughout. words chosen with care, yet carrying implications that seemed to hover just beyond clear meaning. "The reference to completing the circle," I said slowly. "That suggests other guests, doesn't it? A carefully selected group." "Exactly so, Hastings. And observe, he does not request the pleasure of my company. He requests the honor. There is a difference, not a subtle distinction that suggests he views my presence as more than social courtesy." Poirot rose from his chair and began his characteristic pacing, his hands clasped behind his back, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the thick Persian carpet. A man of his stature does not invite Hercule Poirot to witness what he terms his last supper, unless he anticipates that supper to be of more than gastronomic interest. He continued thoughtfully. The very phrase carries biblical connotations: betrayal, sacrifice, the gathering of disciples for a final meal before tragedy strikes. The implications of Poirot's words sent a slight chill through me. In our years of friendship, I had learned to take seriously his intuitive responses to seemingly innocent situations. Too often, what appeared to be social awkwardness or dramatic flourish had concealed darker purposes. "You think he's in some sort of danger?" I asked. Poirot paused in his pacing and fixed me with that penetrating stare that indicated his mind was already several steps ahead of the conversation. "Danger, mon ami? Perhaps. Or perhaps he is the danger himself. Sir Reginald Ashworth has built his fortune and reputation through the careful manipulation of circumstances and people. Such men make enemies as easily as they make money." He returned to the table and regarded the invitation once more. "What troubles Poirot most particularly is this. Why does a man who specializes in financial calculations and practical matters choose to express himself in the language of last testaments and biblical drama?" The question hung in the air between us, laden with implications I was only beginning to grasp. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance, Big Ben chimed the hour with solemn authority. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The private dining room at Claridge's had been transformed into something approaching theatrical magnificence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of light over polished mahogany and gleaming silver, while heavy burgundy curtains shut out the November fog that pressed against the tall windows. The table had been set for 6 with mathematical precision, each place setting a study in geometric perfection that would have pleased even Poirot's exacting standards. We had arrived punctually at 8 o'clock. Poirot, having spent considerable time ensuring his appearance met the highest standards of sartorial excellence, wore patent leather shoes that gleamed, a mustache waxed to particularly impressive points, and evening clothes bearing not a single wrinkle. I had learned long ago that my friend's attention to such details often proved prophetic. Tonight, it seemed, would demand our very best presentation. "Observe, mon ami," Poirot murmured, as we were shown to our places by a discreet waiter. 6 chairs arranged with careful consideration. Our host has planned this evening as one might choreograph a ballet, every movement calculated, every position deliberate. Lady Evelyn Ashworth entered first, and I confess my breath caught slightly at the sight of her. She was a woman of perhaps 45, with that particular brand of English beauty that improves with age rather than diminishing. Her dark hair was arranged in the modern style, and her evening gown of midnight blue silk suggested both wealth and impeccable taste. Yet there was something in her bearing, a careful control that spoke of long practice in concealing emotion. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a gloved hand with practiced grace, "how delightful to meet you at last. Reginald has spoken of you often." Her voice was cultured, melodious, but I detected an undertone of strain that her smile did not quite manage to conceal. "The pleasure, madame, is entirely mine," Poirot replied with his customary gallantry, bowing over her hand with old-world courtesy. Henry Ashworth arrived next, and the family resemblance was immediately apparent. He possessed his mother's dark coloring, but his father's robust build, though where Sir Reginald projected authority, Henry seemed to radiate nervous energy. His movements were quick and restless, his eyes darting about the room as though cataloging escape routes. When he shook hands, his palm was slightly damp despite the room's comfortable temperature. "Mr. Poirot, isn't it?" he said, his voice carrying the hearty tone of a man determined to appear at ease. "Father's told me all about your remarkable cases. Quite thrilling stuff, I'm sure." The third guest to arrive was Mr. Julian Carew, and his entrance transformed the atmosphere of the room as surely as storm clouds announce approaching thunder. He was a man of Sir Reginald's generation, tall and distinguished, with iron gray hair and piercing blue eyes. But where politeness had marked the previous introductions, Carew's acknowledgement of Poirot was coolly formal, and he ignored me entirely. "Carew," Lady Evelyn said with careful neutrality. "Evelyn." His response was equally measured, though I caught the flash of something warmer in his eyes before he turned away. The fourth member of our party proved to be Miss Violet Grey, Sir Reginald's secretary, a woman of perhaps 30, with intelligent brown eyes and the brisk efficiency of one accustomed to managing other people's affairs. She carried herself with quiet confidence, though she seemed acutely aware of the social distinctions that placed her in a somewhat awkward position among the other guests. "Miss Grey has been invaluable to me," Lady Evelyn explained as introductions were made. "I don't know how Reginald manages his correspondence without her." "Sir Reginald is most particular about his correspondence," Miss Grey replied with a slight smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Every detail must be perfect." It was then that our host himself appeared, and I understood immediately why the invitation had troubled Poirot so deeply. Sir Reginald Ashworth was a man of commanding presence, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the bearing of one accustomed to having his wishes treated as law. But tonight there was something different about him, an almost feverish intensity that seemed to electrify the very air around him. "My dear friends," he announced, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire gathering. "How splendid to see you all here for this most special occasion." His voice carried easily across the room, rich and resonant. Yet underneath the warmth I detected something else, a note of barely contained excitement that set my nerves on edge. He moved among his guests with the practiced ease of a consummate host. Yet I noticed that each person he greeted seemed to stiffen slightly at his approach. Lady Evelyn's smile became more fixed. Henry's nervous energy increased perceptibly, and Carew's expression darkened to something approaching hostility. Only Miss Grey maintained her professional composure, though her knuckles whitened slightly as she clasped her small evening bag. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald said finally, approaching our little group with both hands extended in welcome. "The guest of honor arrives. How delightful that you could join us for this farewell celebration." "Farewell, Sir Reginald?" Poirot inquired with delicate precision. "You speak as one departing on a journey." Sir Reginald's laugh was hearty, but somehow hollow. "Ah, but are we not all on journeys, my dear fellow? Some merely reach their destination sooner than others." The cryptic response seemed to hang in the air like incense, heavy with unspoken meaning. I saw Poirot's eyes narrow slightly, that telltale sign that his remarkable mind had detected something significant in what might have seemed mere social pleasantry. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sir Reginald continued, moving toward the head of the table with theatrical flourish, "shall we begin? The evening promises to be most illuminating. As we took our assigned seats, I could not shake the feeling that we had all become unwitting players in some elaborate drama, the final act to which remained mercifully hidden from our view. The stage was set, the players assembled, and somewhere, in the shadows of this elegant room, I sensed that destiny was preparing to make its entrance. Chapter 3. Courses of Betrayal. The first course arrived with the silent precision that marked Claridge's impeccable service. As the waiters glided between our chairs, I found myself studying not the delicate consommé before me, but the curious selection our host had chosen for this supposedly festive occasion. The clear broth was garnished with bitter herbs, tansy, and wormwood, an odd choice that seemed calculated to remind one of mortality rather than celebration. "How appropriate," Sir Reginald observed, lifting his spoon with theatrical deliberation, "that we should begin with something so transparent. Clarity, my dear friends, is such a rare commodity in our modern world, don't you think?" Lady Evelyn's spoon trembled almost imperceptibly as she raised it to her lips. "Clarity can be rather overrated, Reginald. Some things are better left undefined." "Ah, but my dear Evelyn," her husband replied with a smile that never reached his eyes, "it is precisely those undefined things that prove most fascinating upon closer examination. Take, for instance, the recent fluctuations in certain colonial investments, most mysterious, yet so very revealing when one knows where to look." I noticed Caro's jaw tighten at this remark, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his spoon. Henry, meanwhile, had abandoned all pretense of eating and was staring at his father with something approaching panic. The soup was cleared away with the same efficient silence, replaced by a second course that struck me as equally symbolic. The fish was prepared in a rich, complex sauce that masked its true nature. One could taste the delicate flesh underneath, yet the elaborate preparation seemed designed to conceal rather than complement. "Sol Veronique," Sir Reginald announced, unnecessarily as though we were students requiring instruction. "A dish that demonstrates how the finest ingredients can be transformed into something altogether different through careful manipulation. Rather like certain financial documents, wouldn't you say, Henry?" His son's face had gone quite pale. "I'm afraid I don't follow your meaning, father. Don't you? How curious. I should have thought the parallel quite obvious. The way perfectly legitimate transactions can be dressed up to appear as something they are not. Signatures forged here, dates altered there. The art lies in making the artificial seem authentic." Miss Gray's pen moved steadily across the small notebook she had produced from her evening bag, though what exactly she was recording remained unclear. Her expression was one of professional neutrality, yet I caught her glancing repeatedly at Henry, with what might have been concern. "Really, Reginald?" Lady Evelyn interjected with forced lightness. "Must we discuss business at dinner? Surely there are more pleasant topics for such an elegant occasion." "Pleasant topics?" Sir Reginald's laugh held no warmth whatsoever. "How refreshing." "That you should mention pleasure, my dear. Tell me, do you still find your theatrical entertainments as diverting as you once did? Though I suppose one's tastes change as one matures. Younger performers perhaps offer different attractions." The color drained from Lady Evelyn's face so completely that I feared she might faint. Beside me, I felt Poirot's attention sharpen like a blade being drawn from its sheath. His green eyes moved from face to face, cataloging reactions with the methodical precision of a scientist recording experimental data. Caro could contain himself no longer. "Ashworth," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you have something to say, say it plainly. This game of yours serves no purpose except cruelty." "Cruelty?" Sir Reginald appeared genuinely surprised. "My dear Julian, how you misjudge me. I speak only of truth, that most precious of commodities. Truth about business partnerships built on deception. Truth about marriage, vows honored more in breach than observance. Truth about loyalty that can be purchased with the right inducement. The third course arrived as if summoned by the mounting tension. Lamb prepared in a dark wine-rich sauce that seemed to echo the increasingly bitter flavor of the conversation. I found myself barely tasting the food, so transfixed was I by the psychological drama unfolding before us. "You speak of truth," Miss Grey said quietly, her pen pausing for the first time since dinner had begun, as though it were always welcome. "But surely there are some truths better left unspoken." Sir Reginald turned to his secretary with what might have been approval. "How perceptive, my dear Violet. Indeed, the timing of truth is everything, is it not? The revelation that comes too early lacks impact, while that which arrives too late serves no purpose at all. The art lies in choosing the perfect moment, when all the players are assembled, all the evidence laid out, all the final preparations complete." I became aware that Poirot had grown very still beside me, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, his entire being focused on our host's words. There was something in Sir Reginald's tone, a finality that went beyond mere dinner conversation, that seemed to electrify the very air around our table. The servants moved among us like ghosts, replacing plates and refilling glasses with practiced invisibility. Yet I noticed how each of our party had begun to eat more slowly, as though the very act of consumption had become secondary to the mounting psychological pressure that filled the room. Outside, the November fog pressed against the windows with increasing persistence, sealing us into this elegant chamber where past sins were being catalogued with methodical precision, and future reckonings seemed to hover just beyond the reach of candlelight. Chapter 4. The final toast. The servants had been dismissed with a gesture from Sir Reginald after the main course, leaving us in that peculiar isolation that only the finest establishments could provide. The silence that followed their departure seemed to pulse with unspoken tensions, as though the very air had grown thick with the weight of accumulated secrets. I noticed that Miss Grey had closed her notebook and was now regarding our host with an expression I could not quite decipher, part attention, part apprehension. The final course arrived by Sir Reginald's own hand, a selection of exotic fruits arranged with artistic precision, accompanied by a bottle of wine that even my untrained eye could recognize as exceptional. The label bore a vintage that spoke of rarity and considerable expense, though the significance of the choice remained characteristically mysterious. "Chateau d'Yquem, 1921, Sir Reginald announced as he began to pour the golden liquid into our glasses with ceremonial care. "A wine that has waited 14 years for this precise moment. Rather like justice, one might say. It improves with patience. But there comes a time when it must finally be served." I watched as he moved around the table, filling each glass to exactly the same level with the precision of a chemist measuring doses. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate, yet there was something in his bearing that suggested a man approaching the culmination of a long-planned performance. "Justice is a curious thing," Caro observed, his voice carrying a note of challenge. "It often depends upon one's perspective. What one man calls justice, another might term revenge." "How philosophical you've become, Julian," Sir Reginald replied, returning to his place at the head of the table. "Though I suppose recent events might inspire such contemplation. Tell me, do you still sleep peacefully knowing what you know about the Bombay cotton contracts?" Caro's face darkened, but before he could respond, Lady Evelyn leaned forward with desperate urgency. "Reginald, please," she said, her composed facade finally cracking. Whatever grievances you harbor, whatever scores you feel must be settled. Surely this is neither the time nor the place." "On the contrary, my dear," her husband replied with terrible gentleness, "this is precisely the time and place. When better to speak of endings than at the end? When more appropriate to discuss final reckonings than at one's final meal?" Henry's nervous energy had reached a breaking point. His hands shook visibly as he reached for his wineglass, though he had yet to raise it to his lips. "Father," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "if this is about the Johannesburg accounts, I can explain everything. The discrepancies were merely clerical errors, nothing more." "Clerical errors?" Sir Reginald's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. How refreshing to hear such honesty at last. Though I confess, £30,000 seems rather a substantial clerical error, don't you think? The silence that followed this pronouncement was so complete that I could hear the gentle hiss of gas flames in the chandeliers overhead. Miss Grey had grown very pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Poirot sat motionless beside me, his attention fixed on our host with laser-like intensity. Sir Reginald stood slowly, raising his glass with theatrical deliberation. The wine caught the light, glowing like liquid amber in the crystal vessel. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying the resonance of a man accustomed to commanding attention, "we have shared more than a meal tonight. We have shared truths, uncomfortable perhaps, but necessary. Each of you knows why you are here, knows what role you have played in bringing us to this moment." He paused, his gaze moving from face to face with methodical precision. "Evelyn, my faithful wife who found comfort in the arms of younger men while I built our fortune. Henry, my devoted son, who believed he could steal from his own father without consequence. Julian, my trusted partner, who conspired to destroy everything we built together. And dear Miss Grey, who has served me so faithfully while harboring such interesting secrets of her own." Lady Evelyn had begun to weep silently, her carefully applied cosmetics streaking down her cheeks. Henry looked as though he might be sick, while Caro's expression had hardened into something approaching hatred. "You speak of truth," Miss Grey said quietly, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "But what of mercy? What of forgiveness?" Sir Reginald smiled then, an expression of such chilling satisfaction that I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Forgiveness, my dear Violet, is a luxury I can no longer afford. Some debts must be paid in full, some accounts settled. Completely. Justice delayed is justice denied, as they say." He raised the glass higher, the wine catching the light like a golden beacon in the elegant room. "To endings," he declared with dramatic finality, "and to the consequences of our choices. May we all receive exactly what we deserve, the we." Wineglass had almost reached his lips when he suddenly gasped, a sound of such startled anguish that it seemed to echo from the very walls themselves. His face contorted in pain, his free hand clutching at his chest, as though trying to grasp something vital that was slipping away. The crystal glass fell from his nerveless fingers, shattering against the polished floor in a cascade of golden wine and glittering fragments. Sir Reginald followed it down, his body crumpling with terrible finality as chaos erupted around the elegant table that had so recently hosted his calculated performance of accusation and revelation. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. Lady Evelyn's scream pierced the silence like a blade, high and sharp, and filled with a terror that seemed to echo from the very walls of the elegant dining room. Henry leapt from his chair with such violence that it toppled backward, clattering against the polished floor as he rushed to where his father lay crumpled, beside the shattered wineglass. "Father! Father!" he cried, dropping to his knees beside the motionless figure. His hands fluttered helplessly over Sir Reginald's still form, as though uncertain where to begin or what to do. But it was Poirot, who took command of the situation with his characteristic precision. Rising from his chair with fluid grace, he moved swiftly to Henry's side. "Do not touch anything more, monsieur," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "Stand back, if you please. We must preserve the scene exactly as it is." Miss Grey had already moved toward the fallen man with professional efficiency, her training as a secretary, apparently, extending to emergency situations. She knelt carefully beside Sir Reginald, avoiding the scattered glass fragments, and pressed her fingers to his wrist with practiced skill. "There's no pulse," she announced quietly, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I'm afraid he's gone." Caro had backed away from the table, his face a mask of shock and something that might have been relief. "Good God," he breathed. "The man's dead. Actually dead." "We must summon help immediately," Poirot declared, his green eyes already scanning the room with methodical intensity. "But first, I must insist that no one leave this room. No one must touch anything. The scene must remain exactly as it is." "But surely we should call a doctor," Lady Evelyn protested, through her tears. "There might still be something." "Madam," Poirot interrupted gently but firmly, "I fear it is too late for medical assistance. But there is a physician dining downstairs, Dr. Patterson. I observed him when we arrived. Miss Grey, perhaps you would be so kind as to ring for the manager and request that Dr. Patterson attend us immediately. Tell him only that there has been an accident." As Miss Grey moved toward the bell pull with steady composure, I found myself marveling at the transformation that had overtaken our gathering. Minutes before, we had been participants in an uncomfortable but civilized dinner party. Now we were something else entirely, witnesses to a death, suspects in what might prove to be a crime. Poirot had begun his examination of the scene with the methodical precision I knew so well. He studied the position of Sir Reginald's body, the scattered glass fragments, the spilled wine that had formed a golden pool on the expensive carpet. His movements were careful and deliberate, disturbing nothing while observing everything. "Most curious," he murmured, more to himself than to the rest of us. "The wine glass fell from his right hand, yet the stain pattern suggests—" He paused. "Ah, but I must not theorize without data." The manager arrived within minutes, a man of distinguished appearance whose professional composure nearly masked his obvious concern. Behind him came Dr. Patterson, a solidly built gentleman of middle years, whose medical bag suggested he had come prepared for any eventuality. "What seems to be the trouble here?" Dr. Patterson inquired, then stopped short as he saw Sir Reginald's body on the floor. "Good heavens!" He moved immediately to the fallen man, kneeling beside him with professional competence. His examination was thorough but brief, his expression growing increasingly grave as he worked. "I'm afraid there's nothing to be done," he announced finally, sitting back on his heels. "The gentleman is deceased. Has been for several minutes, I should judge." "Can you determine the cause of death, doctor?" Poirot asked quietly. Dr. Patterson frowned, studying Sir Reginald's face with careful attention. "Difficult to say with certainty without a proper examination. The symptoms suggest cardiac arrest, possibly brought on by extreme stress or excitement. There's no obvious sign of violence or external trauma." "What about poison?" Henry asked suddenly, his voice cracking slightly on the words. "Poison?" Dr. Patterson looked surprised. "Well, I suppose it's possible, though I see no immediate evidence of it. No foaming at the mouth, No distinctive odor, no obvious discoloration. If poison were involved, it would have to be something quite sophisticated. The inspector arrived with commendable speed, accompanied by a constable and the police photographer. I had worked with him on numerous occasions and knew him to be a competent, if sometimes unimaginative, investigator. His weathered face showed no surprise at finding Poirot at the scene. Our friend's presence at unusual deaths had become something of a standing joke at Scotland Yard. "Well, well," said the inspector, removing his hat as he surveyed the scene. "Hercule Poirot and a mysterious death. I should have expected as much. What have we got here?" Poirot provided a concise summary of the evening's events, while the inspector took notes and the photographer captured the scene from every conceivable angle. The inspector listened with growing interest, occasionally asking pointed questions about timing and sequence of events. "So, let me get this straight," he said finally. "The deceased made what amounted to a series of accusations against everyone present, then dropped dead just as he was about to drink a toast. The room was effectively sealed, servants dismissed, doors closed, and the only people present were those he just finished accusing of various crimes." "That is correct," Poirot confirmed. "Most convenient for someone, one might say." The inspector's expression grew thoughtful as he studied the assembled guests, each of whom had been questioned briefly and asked to remain available for further inquiry. "Right. Then I'll need detailed statements from all of you, and I'll want that wine analyzed, both what's left in the bottle and what's spilled on the floor. If Sir Reginald was poisoned, the wine's the obvious suspect." But even as the investigation began in earnest, I could see that Poirot was troubled by something. His eyes kept returning to details that seemed insignificant to the rest of us. The precise position of the cutlery, the arrangement of the remaining wine glasses, the way the light caught certain surfaces. Whatever was bothering him, I knew from experience that it would eventually prove crucial to solving the mystery of Sir Reginald Ashworth's dramatic and untimely death. Chapter 6. Secrets in Silver. The following morning found Poirot and myself in his sitting room, surrounded by the carefully organized notes he had taken during our interviews with each of the dinner guests. The preliminary police report lay open on his desk, its conclusions as unsatisfactory as they were mystifying. Dr. Patterson's initial examination had revealed no obvious cause of death, and the chemical analysis of the wine had shown no trace of any known poison. "Most perplexing, mon ami," Poirot observed, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision. "A man dies dramatically in a locked room, surrounded by those he has just accused of various crimes, yet science can find no explanation for his demise." "Perhaps it truly was his heart," I suggested. "The strain of the evening, the dramatic confrontation he'd orchestrated, surely that could trigger a cardiac episode in a man his age." Poirot's green eyes fixed upon me with that particular intensity that indicated my practical logic had missed some crucial element. "Ah, but consider, Hastings. Sir Reginald was not a man given to uncontrolled emotion. He orchestrated that evening with theatrical precision. Every accusation, every revelation was calculated for maximum effect. Such a man does not simply succumb to the stress of his own performance." Our first call that morning was upon Lady Evelyn at her Belgravia residence. The elegant townhouse reflected her impeccable taste, though I noticed that several valuable pieces appeared to be missing from their obvious places. Lighter squares on the wallpaper where paintings had hung, empty spaces on mantels where ornaments should have stood. Lady Evelyn received us in her morning room, dressed in black silk that emphasized her pallor. Her composure had returned, but I detected a brittleness in her manner that suggested carefully controlled desperation. "I've told Inspector everything I know," she said quietly, gesturing for us to be seated. "Reginald and I had difficulties. It's true, our marriage had not been happy for some years." "The young actor, Madame," Poirot said gently. "Your husband spoke of theatrical entertainments. Was there perhaps someone specific who had captured your affections?" Lady Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. "David Marlowe. He's barely 25, Monsieur Poirot. Talented, ambitious, and yes, I was fond of him. But Reginald discovered the association. He threatened to ruin David's career unless I ended all contact. And did you comply with his wishes?" "I had no choice. Reginald controlled everything, my allowance, my social position, even my correspondence. He had Miss Grey monitor my letters, my telephone calls. I was a prisoner in my own home." As we left Lady Evelyn's residence, I noticed Poirot making careful notes about her financial circumstances and the obvious signs of economic pressure. Our next visit took us to Henry Ashworth's modest flat in Bloomsbury, where the contrast with his mother's elegant home was immediately apparent. Henry lived in genteel poverty, surrounded by the remnants of better times. His sitting room contained expensive furniture that had clearly seen better days, and his clothes, while well cut, showed signs of careful mending. "The Johannesburg investments," he admitted when pressed, "were my responsibility. I thought I could recoup the losses before father discovered them. The market was so volatile, and I was certain that with just a bit more time, £30,000 is a considerable sum to lose through market fluctuations," Poirot observed mildly. Henry quote. His face crumpled. "It wasn't lost to the market. Not exactly. I borrowed against the accounts to cover other debts. Gambling debts, if you must know. I thought I could win it back, replace it before anyone noticed." Our afternoon was spent in the city, where Julian Caro's offices occupied an entire floor of a prestigious building near the Bank of England. The man himself was a study in controlled fury, his earlier shock having crystallized into something harder and more dangerous. "Ashworth was a fool," he declared bluntly when we inquired about the Bombay cotton contracts. "He thought he was cleverer than everyone else, thought he could manipulate markets and governments with equal ease. The cotton scheme was doomed from the start. I tried to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. Yet you continued as his partner. I stayed to limit the damage, to protect our other investments. But Reginald was determined to pursue his colonial fantasies. When the scheme inevitably collapsed, he blamed me for his own poor judgment. The most intriguing visit of the day proved to be Miss Violet Grey's modest flat in Marylebone. The secretary lived with Spartan efficiency, her rooms containing only the most essential furnishings. What captured my attention immediately, however, was the impressive collection of botanical specimens that occupied every available surface. Exotic plants in carefully labeled pots lined the windowsills and filled several glass cases. Books on botany and pharmacology occupied prominent places on her shelves, and I noticed several volumes dealing specifically with the medicinal and toxic properties of various species. "I study plants as a hobby," Miss Grey explained when she noticed our interest. "I find their properties fascinating, how something so beautiful can be either healing or harmful depending upon how it's used." She showed us her prized specimens with obvious pride. Rare orchids from South America, succulents from Africa, and several plants whose names I did not recognize, but whose ominous Latin designations suggested they were not intended for casual gardening. "This one," she said, indicating a particularly exotic specimen with delicate white flowers, "produces a compound that can affect the heart in very small doses. Fascinating how nature provides both medicine and poison from the same source. As we walked back through the London streets toward Poirot's flat, my mind was reeling with the complexity of motives and opportunities we had uncovered. Each of the dinner guests had compelling reasons to wish Sir Reginald dead, yet the method of murder remained frustratingly elusive. "The botanical collection troubles you, mon ami?" Poirot inquired, noting my thoughtful silence. "It seems rather coincidental," I admitted. "A man dies mysteriously, and one of the suspects happens to be an expert in poisonous plants." Poirot nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Indeed, Hastings, but remember that in a case such as this, what appears obvious is often precisely what we are meant to see. The truth, I suspect, lies not in what catches our attention, but in what we have failed to notice entirely." Asterisk, asterisk. Chapter 7. The smallest detail. Asterisk, asterisk. 3 days after Sir Reginald's death, Poirot announced his intention to return to the scene of the crime. The inspector had given his grudging permission for what my friend diplomatically termed a final examination of the physical evidence, though I suspected Poirot had something rather more theatrical in mind. "It is necessary, mon ami," he explained as we made our way once again to Claridge's, "to see the room exactly as it was on that evening. The little gray cells, they require the precise stimulus of the original environment to perceive what they have thus far overlooked." The manager had arranged for the private dining room to be restored to its exact condition from the night of the dinner party. The same crystal glassware gleamed on the polished table. The same silver cutlery lay arranged with geometric precision, and even the wine bottle, now empty, its contents having been subjected to exhaustive analysis, stood in its original position. All our suspects had been persuaded to attend this reconstruction, though their reasons for compliance varied considerably. Lady Evelyn arrived with the resigned dignity of one who had endured too much to protest further indignities. Henry appeared more nervous than ever, his hands shaking as he took his assigned seat. Caro's presence radiated barely controlled hostility, while Miss Grey maintained her professional composure despite the obvious strain of the past few days. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, positioning himself where Sir Reginald had stood for his final toast, "we gather here, not to relive that tragic evening, but to understand it. Somewhere in the sequence of events that led to Sir Reginald's death lies a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that we have all overlooked its importance." He moved slowly around the table, his green eyes cataloging every element of the scene with methodical precision. I watched him examine the placement of each glass, each piece of cutlery, each serving dish with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient manuscripts. "The wine," he continued, "has been analyzed most thoroughly. No poison. The glasses, similarly examined, no residue of any harmful substance. The food, though, consumed hours before the death, contained nothing that could account for Sir Reginald's sudden collapse." "But what are you suggesting?" Caro demanded impatiently. "That the man simply willed himself to death? That his dramatic gesture was so effective it became reality?" Poirot paused in his circuit of the table, his attention suddenly focused on a particular spot near where Sir Reginald had been seated. "Tell me, Miss Grey," he said quietly. "You mentioned that you assisted Sir Reginald with his medication earlier that evening. Can you describe the circumstances?" Miss Grey's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. "He complained of indigestion during the second course. I had brought along a small bottle of his usual remedy, a digestive powder that his physician had prescribed. I measured out the proper dose using a small spoon I always carry for such purposes. Ah, yes, the small spoon. Most thoughtful of you to come prepared for such eventualities. And this spoon? You have it with you now? Yes, I believe so. Miss Grey opened her evening bag and withdrew a tiny silver spoon, no larger than those used for serving salt or mustard. Poirot examined the implement with the reverence of an archaeologist handling a precious artifact. As he turned it in the light, I noticed his mustache twitch slightly, that telltale sign that his remarkable mind had detected something of crucial importance. Most interesting, he murmured. Such a delicate piece, so easily overlooked among the grander silver of Claridge's service. Tell me, Miss Grey, have you cleaned this spoon since that evening? Cleaned it? No, there seemed no need. It was used only for the digestive powder. Précisément, no need at all. Poirot's voice carried a note of satisfaction that sent a chill through the room. Yet how curious that such a small implement should retain traces of substances other than simple digestive medicine. The silence that followed this observation was profound. Lady Evelyn had grown very pale, while Henry stared at the little spoon as though it had suddenly transformed into something monstrous. Caro leaned forward with obvious interest, but it was Miss Grey's reaction that proved most telling. Her professional composure had finally cracked entirely. Color drained from her face and her hands trembled visibly as she clasped them in her lap. I don't understand what you're implying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Do you not? Poirot's tone was gentle, almost compassionate. Then perhaps you will permit me to explain. The poison that killed Sir Reginald was not in his wine, not in his food, not applied to any of the obvious implements that might carry such a substance to his lips. He held up the tiny spoon, letting the light catch its silver surface. It was here, on this innocent little implement that you so thoughtfully provided for his medication. A slow-acting toxin derived from one of your botanical specimens, applied with such precision that it would take effect only after sufficient time had passed. Time enough for Sir Reginald to complete his theatrical accusations. Time enough for him to raise that final toast. Miss Grey's hands were shaking openly now, her carefully maintained facade crumbling like a house of cards in a strong wind. You planned it perfectly, mademoiselle. Most ingenious, most perfectly calculated. The room seemed to hold its breath as the full implications of Poirot's deduction settled over us like a heavy shroud. In the space of a few minutes, what had appeared to be an impossible crime had been reduced to a simple matter of method and opportunity, hidden within the smallest and most overlooked of details. Chapter 8. Justice served. The silence that followed Poirot's revelation stretched like a taut wire through the elegant dining room. Miss Grey sat motionless in her chair, the color completely drained from her face, while the other guests stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to horrified fascination. Inspector Japp, who had arrived quietly during Poirot's explanation, positioned himself near the door with the practiced ease of a man who had witnessed many such moments of truth. Now then, Poirot continued, his voice carrying that peculiar gentleness he reserved for the moment when all pretense must finally fall away. Let us complete our understanding of this most carefully planned crime. The toxin, I believe, came from your asterisk digitalis obscura, a rare variant of the foxglove that you cultivated so lovingly in your flat. Am I not correct? Miss Grey's lips moved soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. You cannot prove any of this, she whispered, though the words carried no conviction. Ah, but I can, mademoiselle. The little spoon will reveal traces of the compound, when subjected to proper analysis. More importantly, your own botanical journals will show your research into the precise dosages required to create a delayed reaction. You were most thorough in your preparations. Dr. Patterson, who had been summoned to provide medical corroboration, leaned forward with professional interest. Digitalis derivatives can indeed cause cardiac arrest, he confirmed, and, depending on the specific alkaloids involved, the onset could be delayed by 30 to 40 minutes, precisely the time frame we observed. Lady Evelyn found her voice first among the other guests. "But why?" she asked, her tone carrying genuine bewilderment. "Miss Grey, you seem so devoted to Reginald. Why would you want to harm him?" For the first time since Poirot had begun his explanation, Miss Grey raised her eyes to meet those of her questioner. The professional mask she had worn for so many years had finally fallen away entirely, revealing something raw and wounded beneath. "Devoted?" she repeated, and there was bitter laughter in her voice. "Yes, I was devoted. For 7 years I managed his correspondence, organized his affairs, protected his secrets, and all the while I knew exactly what kind of man he truly was." "But surely your position provided you with security," Henry began, only to be silenced by the look Miss Grey turned upon him. "Security?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "He destroyed my brother, Mr. Henry, completely and deliberately. Richard was a good man, an honest broker who made the mistake of questioning one of your father's more questionable schemes. So Sir Reginald planted evidence of embezzlement in Richard's accounts, forged documents to support his accusations, and watched calmly as my brother's reputation was destroyed. Richard killed himself rather than face trial for crimes he never committed. He left a letter explaining everything, but by then it was too late. Sir Reginald had covered his tracks too well. No one would have believed the word of a dismissed secretary against such a prominent financier." The room had grown very still, the only sound the gentle hiss of gas flames in the chandeliers overhead. Even Caro, who had shown such open hostility towards Sir Reginald, seemed shocked by the calculated cruelty Miss Grey described. "So you sought employment with Sir Reginald himself," Poirot observed quietly. "The perfect position for planning your revenge." "I wanted him to suffer as Richard had suffered. I wanted him to face accusations he could not refute, to experience the helplessness of being destroyed by someone he trusted. The dinner party was his own idea. He wanted to torment all of you with his accusations and threats. I simply ensured that his final performance would indeed be his last." Inspector Japp stepped forward with professional courtesy. "Miss Violet Grey, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashworth. You are not obliged to say anything, but anything you do say will be taken down and may be used in evidence." She nodded with quiet dignity, rising from her chair without protest. As the constable prepared to escort her from the room, she paused beside Poirot. "You understand, don't you, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked softly. "Justice delayed is justice denied, as he said himself. Sometimes one must take matters into one's own hands." Poirot regarded her with compassionate eyes. "I understand the desire for justice, mademoiselle, but the law exists to prevent us from becoming the very thing we seek to punish. Your brother would not have wished you to sacrifice your own life for his memory." As Miss Grey was led away, the remaining guests sat in stunned silence. The elegant dining room, scene of so much carefully orchestrated drama, now seemed merely empty and cold. "Well," said Japp finally, closing his notebook with characteristic briskness, "that's that, then. Neat bit of work, Poirot. Spotting that business with the spoon. Might have taken us weeks to work it out otherwise." Poirot straightened his tie with methodical precision, his green eyes surveying the abandoned table with its untouched wine, glasses and forgotten silver dot. The theatrical staging of Sir Reginald's final dinner had indeed achieved its dramatic conclusion. though not in the manner its orchestrator had intended. Later, as we walked through the London fog toward Poirot's flat, I found myself reflecting on the strange justice of the evening's revelations. Sir Reginald had gathered his victims for a final reckoning, only to discover that he had been sharing the table with his own executioner all along. "A most instructive case, mon ami," Poirot observed as we reached his door. "It reminds us that the smallest details often contain the greatest truths, and that justice, however delayed, has a way of finding its own path." The fog swirled around us as we climbed the stairs, carrying with it the weight of secrets revealed, and scores finally settled in that elegant room where the Last Supper had indeed been served. Thank you for joining us for *The Last Supper at Claridge, *S*. Did you suspect Miss Grey before Poirot revealed the truth about the poison spoon? Tell us in the comments. If you like this mystery, please subscribe to Cafe Tales. Until next time, this is Ailey signing off from Cafe Tales.